many young older boys whose job it is to corrupt young children. They tell you to steal at night. Break into the store, take out the candy or take out, cigars or cigarettes, and then they tell you to sell drugs. Meaning, they give you a package. They say, bring it over to this other guy. He'll give you money. And if girls, they try to encourage you to sell your body. So some kids, my friends, who were good kids, they couldn't resist the money because you could get in those days you could get $5. Normally, if you had a job, you get a quarter an hour. So $5 would be an enormous amount of money. So that was a big temptation. And they gave in. Some cases, they got caught. And if you got caught, so the deal was, if you got caught, then they would tell you, if you tell them who did it, we kill your family. And then the police, they put you in a juvenile detention. You're in juvenile they beat the hell out of you. In some cases, you get raped as a boy by other older boys, and many of these kids were psychologically destroyed. They were never the same when they came out. And so me and other friends never did that. And so the first time I was an intuitive psychologist to ask the question, why do some children, I knew mostly boys, give in to temptation to do bad things for money, and why do other people like me don't? I didn't have a good answer, but I thought it really has to do with, for me, having a strong mother who gave you unconditional love. I love you no matter what, but she also had a moral compass that you cannot do these bad things. You don't do anything that people tell you to do just for money, because you don't do anything that will make us ashamed. She said, I want to be proud of you, okay? And so I think that, now, I don't know if the other boys who did bad things didn't have that kind of mother, but I know some of my other friends from different backgrounds, different religions, had mothers like that. The other thing I never understood was, here are these boys, everybody's poor, everybody's the same, but in this neighborhood, most kids were Italian, Irish, Armenian, and for some reason they hated Jews. This is in the early 40s. And I looked Jewish. I was very skinny coming out of the hospital. I had blue eyes. I had a long nose. And they used to chase me and yell, "Dirty Jew bastard." I didn't know what that was. "Dirty Jew bastard." So I learned to run very fast. And I became later the captain of the track team at Brooklyn College. and so I use every bad experience in a positive way. And then it turns out, my mother told the son of the janitor, a black boy who lived in our house, "Could you take my son to church?" He said, No, we can't take him to church. He's Jewish. My mother said, "No, we're Italian. We're Catholic. What do you?" He said, "Oh, we've been beating him up because he's a dirty Jew bastard." That's what they were saying. And I felt it was so upsetting to say, so what difference? It was the same me. But again, I became aware of the terrible thing, prejudice, putting a label on somebody that automatically you take away the humanity. And the curious thing is, almost about that time, this is happening to Jews in Nazi Germany. So the secret to success for me was school. My parents never went to school. They only went to elementary school. My father and mother didn't go to high school at that time. Their parents were immigrants, but they grew up in the United States. But they had no education, and they had no value to education. They thought, you go to school only because you must by the law, and then as soon as you can, you leave school, you go to work. But all the jobs they had, if you have no education, are terrible jobs, menial jobs. You work cleaning garbage. You work cleaning up a factory or something, or you work at a terrible job in a factory. I said, no, I don't want to do that. And my father kept insisting, okay, go to school as long as you have to, and then you go to work. But I loved school. School was organized. School was clean. School was quiet. There was an agenda. Everything made sense. And where you lived was chaos. I mean, nothing worked. And then I discovered there's something called a book. You open this thing, and there's words. And now that I could read. And then they gave us a card to go to a library. And then there was 1,000 books. And I still remember taking these books and with pictures. And I told the librarian, I said, maybe, I want to keep these. I mean, what would happen if I steal them? She said, you could keep them, but then you could never get another one. If you bring them back, you can have 1,000. I said, that makes sense. And so we never had a book in my house. I came home, I said, this is a book. And they look, oh, they used to have only the Sunday newspaper. And so I fell in love with books. So this was a way I could, and my father would say, don't read so much, you're going to burn your eyes out. So I would get a flashlight at night under the covers of my bed to read at night. So for me, the secret was two things: to love school, and I was good at it, and because it opened a whole new world. I mean, I could be in the worst terrible circumstance. I could be in that hospital, but now I had comic books. So again, the comic books were all superheroes. So I grew up, in addition to learning to read and write, I learned to have superheroes. Superman, I don't know which ones else they had. Batman, and those, they didn't have Spider-Man yet. So these were people I knew had superhuman abilities, but I could imagine. So it also had opened the imagination. So you could be in a hospital where people are dying. You could imagine flying, being free, or you could be in this poor neighborhood, and you could imagine being Huckleberry Finn, or you could imagine being a pilot or something, being in some other country. And so that got me involved. The other thing is, if you are poor, one reason you get poor, one reason you stay poor, if you live only in the present, which means if you live for the moment, that every decision you make is determined by what other people are doing, how you're feeling, what things smell like, look like. And to be successful in life, you have to learn to live in the future, meaning you have to learn to set goals, make objectives, plan. How do I get from here to there? What can I do hour by hour, day by day, to achieve my goal, achieve my successes? So I became very future-oriented, in part because my father was totally present hedonistic. What that means is you're present hedonistic, you live for pleasure, you live for fun, you live for the moment. And what was really sad was my father was very, very talented. Had he grown up in a different family, in a different era, he would have been a huge success. The problem was he was the first boy in a Sicilian family after 7 daughters, earlier daughters. And they treated him like a prince. The problem was he was like a Saudi prince with no oil well. Okay. Meaning he was poor, but he thought in his mind he's like a prince. So he thought people should take care of him, like his sisters did. And he didn't want to take care of anybody. So the family trade was barber. My grandfather, my father, everybody. But he said, I'm not a servant to people. He thought being a barber was a servant to people. He wanted people to take care of him. So then he quit. So he didn't care about working. The problem was he had 4 children. And even with the money from home relief, it's still not enough. But he was complacent. He lived in the moment. So the last story before we move on is he had musical ability and mechanical ability. Musical ability meant by ear he could play violin, mandolin, piano, and guitar, and he could sing. He could hear any song in 30 minutes. He's reproducing it, and he also could dance, and he was very handsome. So he was popular. People would invite him to parties, and he would go. And it was at home, my mother and 4 kids, and he'd come and he'd have a good time. And then, even more amazing, he had mechanical ability. He could fix anything. A broken clock, a wristwatch, a radio, and then he got intrigued with electronics, and we lived in an old house, and below our house was a radio repair shop, and he would stop in every day, and it was a Puerto Rican man in charge, and the man would teach him how to solder, how to read a wiring diagram, and in 1947, my father built a television set from a wiring diagram. Why is that unusual? Television was invented in 1946. The first television was invented in 1946, and he built one exactly like that 1 year later. And it was a phenomenon. In fact, we invited all our friends for the World Series, and we charged a quarter and it was a tiny little screen, all green and gray, whatever. But he also had the idea to put a huge parabolic magnifying glass in front of it so that you could see from different angles and make it bigger. Nobody ever had that idea in history. And he did it. Everybody said, "Oh, George, we want one. We want." I said, "Dad, okay, here's our chance. I work with you. We sell them. Everybody wants to buy." He said, "No, no." I said, "What do you mean, no, no?" It was a challenge. I met the challenge. I could do it. I did one. I would go crazy. How could you be poor? You have a talent. You have a skill. Okay, we don't want to have people come in the house and dance, but people want to buy your product, and it's unique. They don't have another one in all of New York. Even rich people didn't have it. He said, no, no. So he was complacent. He was happy with what he had. He had no ambition. Whatever he had was good enough. And I said, no, no. Whatever we have is not enough. It's not enough for your wife. It's not enough for me. Not enough for the other kid. So I realized, this is a long answer to your question, that two things. Education is the key to success for every young person, especially if your family is not educated. Now, if your family is not educated, it means they do not value education, so you have to not take it for granted. You have to fight it. You have to say, this is my right. Every child has the right to education, one. And then secondly, you have to find a way how to become more future-oriented, how to set goals. Each day you wake up, what am I going to achieve today? You make a to-do list. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be in place on time, I'm going to be conscientious. When I say something, I'm going to live up to what I say. And pretty soon it becomes a habit, so that when it's Friday and your friends say, oh, we're going to party, I say, no, I got exam Monday, so I'm going to start studying, and then by Sunday night, I'm ready to party. They start studying, partying Friday night, Saturday, Sunday night, there's another party, Monday, they fail the exam. So being future-oriented and valuing education, for me, was the key out of poverty, out of the ghetto, to where I am now.
So this leaves us with another point. I mean, you are all this enthusiasm can bring you to a college, and you can have a college degree. And this we're talking about the 50s, but still to go was your enrollment in Yale and having a degree and a PhD and everything. So, how was that possible? I mean, it's a very challenging society, and you are still lacking a lot of funds, and a lot of people want just to cut your wings, right? How was that possible?
Well, for me, the wonderful thing was discovering there's something called psychology. Because I said I was really an intuitive psychologist. I'm a little kid asking why do kids give in to temptation. That's psychology. When I'm a little kid in the hospital, to say, what can I do to make this terrible situation better? What kind of games can I invent? So I was doing psychology before I knew it. And then the problem was, I get to college. I went to Brooklyn College for free. And I take a psychology course, 1950. And it was the most boring course in the world. I hated it. Because psychology then was about rats running mazes. It was really boring. Nothing interesting was done. And I said, no, I'm interested in all these other things. I'm interested in where I live, that black people and Puerto Rican people are moving into this neighborhood where I used to live. We used to be Jewish, Italian, and now there was a lot of conflicts. I'm interested in how these people interact, why they develop prejudice and so forth. That's exciting. I could see, And they said, no, we're interested in how rats learn a Y maze and reward and punishment, and Skinner was famous. Oh my God. So I quit psychology. Went to sociology. I went to anthropology. But I realized what I loved was research. And in my senior year, I took a course in experimental research. Oh no, this is where my heart is. Meaning asking a question and finding out a way to answer it. I said, oh, this is what psychologists really do well. They know how to ask a question, but they have the methods, experimental methods. They know how to make up tests and measurements to answer it. So then I took all the courses in psychology my senior year. And when I went to Yale, I was really unprepared because I had the bare minimum courses. So all the other students knew much more than me. So again, I had to work doubly hard. And I almost failed the first year. I mean, the first year I was there, I barely survived. And
Yale was a scholarship, right?
Yeah, it was an assistantship. I actually, paradoxically, I ran rats for some professor for 3 years. I ran white rats for some professor for 3 years. But again, as an undergraduate, I published an article on the dynamics of prejudice between Puerto Ricans and blacks in the Bronx. I was the senior author of a published article in a sociology journal. And that's what I was interested in. But in order to be at Yale, I had to run math. So, but at the end of 3 years, then I switched into social psychology. But it was the whole idea of asking a question and finding some way to answer it that other people will find interesting. So that's what intrigued me. And then I love to teach because, again, as the older brother of the oldest child of two brothers and sisters, I was always a teacher. My mother would say, entertain your brothers and sisters. So I would always, when I come home, I would teach. Let me tell you what I learned today. So I was always like a little teacher. And then when I was at Yale, I took a course in how to teach. And at the beginning of the term, one of the teachers got sick. So as a graduate student, I began to teach my whole class. And Yale never had graduate students teach, and I fell in love with it. Oh my God, it was intoxicating. It was like a drug. I said, oh my God, I can't wait to teach. I would be sick. I drag myself in. I'm blowing my nose and teach. And that has always kept with me. That is, to be a teacher is like the greatest privilege, the greatest honor, and it's a skill. It's perfectible. Every time I teach, I say, what was good, and then what could I do better? And I always get feedback from students, not at the end, throughout. What did you like most about the lecture? What could I have done better? How could I make it more interesting? And then, so I never in my life taught the same lecture twice. And I taught introductory psychology every year for 40 years. Sometimes I taught fall term, winter term, and summer term. I taught the same course 3 times, but it was never the same. That is, I would always have a new story at the beginning, a new joke, new music, and so forth.
So it was a short tenure in Yale, teaching in 59 till 1960 almost, right? And after that, you found your way to NYU, was it?
Yeah, and New York University. And again, I taught New York University in the Bronx and also in Greenwich Village, yeah. But for 6 years.
And then it was a great step to the west, to Stanford, 1968.
Yeah.
Because we are approaching now the experiment that Najla wants to talk to you about.
But before I do that, is that because I was very, I was dedicated to teaching. I mean, in order to get promoted, you have to publish, because the only way people know you outside of your university. So if you're a good teacher, then they know in your university, because students have evaluations, as they say. But to get promoted, you have to publish that people in your field in other universities know you. So they call it publish or perish. If you don't publish, you perish. So I was interested in experiments, but you can't just do the experiment. You have to publish it. You have to write it up. You have to write it up in an interesting way, in a way that people will read it and remember. So I did a lot of research. I got research grants, and so I never had time really for things like politics, because that was too boring. Except America got involved in the Vietnam War. And it was, a bunch of lies, just like America got involved in Iraq, which is more lies. So I felt I had to do something. So on the side, I got involved as anti-war activist. I organized one of the first, they call teach-ins. So it started at midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning, so students, wouldn't miss class. And I invited Vietnam veterans, Buddhist monks, anti-war activists, politicians, and they would talk about it all night. And so it became famous. It made the newspapers. And then in 1966, New York University was going to give an honorary degree to Robert McNamara, who was Secretary of Defense. The Vietnam War was part of his mission. And I said, no, this is a disgrace. You don't give a. He's a warrior. He's a terrible warrior. So I prearranged, when they mentioned his name, I stood up, and 200 students, parents, and faculty walked out. The next day, it made the New York Times. The walkout of McNamara. So it was just a symbolic thing. But I did not have tenure. I was on a year-to-year contract, and they almost fired me. So they delayed giving me my pay one month after. And at that point, I figured, no, this is the wrong university for me. And luckily for me, the next year, Stanford invited me. Not because of that, but because I had done so much research. And then so Stanford has been my whole life, 1968 until recently.
So back again, and we're reminding our listener that we are having with us the renowned Professor Philip Zimbardo, well known for the Stanford Prison Experiment. And here we come with the question, the Lucifer effect, understanding how good people turn evil. And how do good people turn evil? What's the Lucifer effect?
Well, the Lucifer effect, so I did this experiment in 1971 called the Stanford Prison Experiment. And it was really an attempt to see what happens when you put good people in a really bad place. It ought to be that if everybody in a place is good, they ought to change the nature of the bad place. Or is it that the quality of a bad place changes even the good people? So that's the basic premise. It's humanity versus an evil place. Who wins? And the prison study says humanity 0, evil 1, as in the soccer game. So the study was simply that we put college students from all over the United States who were in the area of Stanford University, which is in Palo Alto, California, which is in the West Coast near San Francisco. They had finished summer school, and we put an advertisement in the local newspaper, wanted college students for a study of prison life. We give you $15 a day for 1 to 2 weeks, how long the experiment will go. And we gave them a number to call. So they called. We interviewed 75 applicants. We gave them a personality test battery, 7 different tests. We gave them an interview about drug use and health, and mental health, physical health. We picked 24, most normal, most healthy, all college students. Not from Stanford, but from all over the country. And then what we did to make an experiment was we randomly assign half to be guards, half to be prisoners. It's like you flip a coin, heads, tail. So that means when we began, there was no difference in the background, psychological background, medical background, physical, of the 12. We had 12 boys going to be guards, 12 boys going to be prisoners. So that's the key. And these are all good. They had never been in trouble. They were psychologically healthy, physically healthy. And then the random assignment was half of them are going to be guards, and we called them immediately to say, come down on Saturday. We had them pick out very attractive, like military uniforms. We gave them billy clubs and whistles and handcuffs, symbols of power. And then we made them feel the prison was their prison. That is, they had the guard quarters, they put in a coffee machine and so forth. And then the prisoners, we said, wait at home, wait in the dormitories. We will contact you on Sunday. Instead, and this is people don't know about the study, I made an arrangement with the real city police to make a very realistic arrest. They went to each student who's going to be a prisoner, knocked on the door, said, Billy Johnson is here. He came out. He said, I'm Captain Matson, you're wanted for violation of Penal Code 459, armed robbery. You have a right to remain silent. You come with me. And they brought him to the police car, handcuffed them, searched them, put him in the car. Siren is wailing. All the neighbors are looking around. And you know this must be the experiment, but you didn't expect this. And then they bring you to the real police station, do a fingerprint, take a photo, and put you in a prison cell. At this point, you feel terrible, you feel guilty, and then they put a blindfold on you, and then my graduate students working with me came and pick you up, and you're blindfolded, bring you down to the Stanford jail. This is going to be our prison in the basement of the psychology department, and you're standing there with a blindfold. They strip you naked, so you're standing in naked with a blindfold, and then they take the blindfold off, and you're in front of a huge mirror, and you're standing naked. And then a guard comes and he sprays you with lice because you must have disease on you. And then they put you in a dress with no underpants and a big chain on your foot with a number. And at that point, you become a prisoner. Well, you take all your identity. You're no longer Billy Johnson. You're 8612. You have to remember that. You could only refer to you that way. Everybody has to refer to you that. And then suddenly, the next prisoner comes until we have 9 prisoners. We're going to live there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then we have 3 guards on each of 8-hour shifts, morning, afternoon, evening, and the other guards as backup, and other prisoners as replacement. And that's how the study began and went. And again, it's 1971, so these boys are all hippies, meaning everybody has huge amount of hair. There's big beards all over. The anti-war activists, the civil rights activists, is a time you hated the police. Nobody wanted to be a guard because it was a time in the Vietnam War. There would be demonstrations against the war at many campuses. The police would come on campus. There would always be battles between police and students. So it was a time of young people being against authority. So the boys who were made to be guards didn't want to be guards. And they actually felt awkward in these uniforms. It was like a military uniform. And so on the first day, nothing happened. And I'm looking at this and say, oh my God, we're going to end this. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Nothing. The guards are saying, come on, you guys, let's take it seriously. No laughing. You know, and they push. But again, the rule was everybody had to learn the numbers. They made them say the number over and over, sing the numbers, repeat the number endlessly. And the next morning, so I was sleeping in my office on a couch in my office in the second floor. The next morning, a guard wakes me, come down, we have a big problem. The prisoners barricaded themselves in the cell. Somehow they found a rope, and they locked the door, and they started yelling. So they said, we don't want to be dehumanized. They ripped off their number. Instead of shaving their head, we put a woman's stocking cap, so they all look the same on their head, nylon stocking cap. They start yelling, and then they start making a mistake of cursing the guards. You little punk, when I got out, I'm going to kick your ass. Suddenly now, the guards who felt awkward begin to say, oh my God, these are dangerous prisoners. So now it's all semantics. These are not students playing the role of prisoners. These are dangerous prisoners. And they are challenging us. So they say, what are we going to do? I said, well, it's your prison. What do you want to do? They said, we need reinforcements. I said, okay, we'll call all the other guards. So now we have 12 guards and 9 prisoners. And now they break down the doors. They take the prisoners out. And this is the only time it was physical. Some of them started having physical fights, but the 12 guards overwhelmed the 9 prisoners. And then they stripped them naked. They tied them up, took the rope from the cell, tied them up, their hands and feet. And then we had a closet, which was solitary confinement. It's called the hole. And they started throwing them in the hole. And at that point, everything changed. After that, no one used the word experiment. It was a prison run by psychologists. And after that point, the guards were proud to be in their uniform. And that one of them said, you come down, you take off your old clothes, you put on your new clothes, you put on the sunglasses, you take your billy club, and he said, and then you become a guard. He said, you step out on the yard, and in this physical place, it's like a stage. So really, it's like role playing. You step out on the stage, and you become a guard. And at that point, it was a prison run by psychologists. And then things just got worse and worse every day. And then the prisoners who were trying to abuse the guards then singled them out for real abuse. And in 36 hours, a prisoner had emotional breakdown, had to be released. And he became a model of how you get out. Every day thereafter, another prisoner broke down. Second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day.
So the prison has an ingredient necessary to bring out the worst in humans, although we call it correctional. So how is this, it's confusing, right? How is it contradictory, correctional, and at the same time bringing the worst out of us?
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, original prisons were called penitentiaries, which means they were places that you would put people outside of town in remote place, so you would be penitent, meaning you would think about what you did wrong. And it was the same model for mental health. So mental hospitals and prisons at some period of time had the same mentality. We want to help these people, and they originally thought that mental illness and prisons were caused by life stress, living in bad places. And so most prisons and most mental hospitals were put in the country to be penitent. And this is, and again, the group called the Quakers in America and other places, were the ones who really led this as a movement. And the idea was, for various reasons, people did bad things. And they were going to be put in a place where they would think about what they did. The punishment was just being separated from your family and society. And that would be punishment enough so that you would correct your bad behavior in order to get home. So the idea was, while you were here, the staff would help you learn how to correct your behavior so you do the right thing. Very quickly it changed to be places of punishment, that you were going to be punished for the things you did. And it didn't matter if you had a little crime or a big crime. Once you were there, you were a prisoner. And there were prisoners and guards. And the assumption was, and the guards often didn't know if you were there for rape, if you were there for armed robbery, if you were there for fraud or whatever. It didn't really matter. You were a prisoner. And they made conditions so terrible that prisoners would always rebel. And then it would always get worse. You get years added on. They put you in solitary confinement. And in the same way, mental hospitals, instead of helping, became places of you were institutionalized. You were put away, and it got worse and worse and worse. So prisons. Foucault talks about this. The French philosopher. Prisons and mental hospitals started both with a very good idea to make people. Take people away from the stress of life so they could recover their sanity, take people away from the stress of life so they could have a better environment, to think more clearly. And both became places of punishment. In mental hospitals, people used to be put in straitjackets. People used to be put in isolation cell for days on end. People in prisons, even now in America, can be put in solitary confinement alone for more than a month. So you're in a place, your family, you're never going to see your family for years. But now within a prison, you're put in your own prison. And you're in a basement, all dark. Imagine, 24 hours a day, you're sleeping on the floor, not a cot. And I have a friend. In my experiment, the man I made my consultant, so I would understand in prison, he had been in prison 17 years. And he had been in solitary confinement altogether maybe a full year. And it permanently damaged him, there's no question. But he was filled with rage. It's a quiet rage. It's always there.
So this means that just maybe 4 or 5 days you had to abort the experiment, right?
We did at the end of 6 days.
So why this happened, and how did it change you and change your mind?
Okay. So the experiment is designed to show the power of the situation, and it did. Good boys playing the role of the guards became sadistic, became creatively evil. Each night they would think of something more terrible to do to the prisoners. And the prisoners, chosen because they're normal and healthy, would begin to have emotional breakdown. Now, you say, well, not all the guards did it, not all the prisoners did it, but the boys you call good guards, who never harmed the prisoners, never once intervened to tell the bad guards, you shouldn't do that. Well, why don't you ease up? Or make a joke about it. Or why don't we play cards instead of waking the prisoners up in the middle of the night? So, and the prisoners who didn't break down never once went to their other prisoners who had been breaking down and say, I'm sorry. Never gave them comfort. So in a sense, there were no good guards. There were no good prisoners. And then what's terrible, there was no good staff. So I made the huge mistake of playing two roles. I should have just been the principal research investigator of the Stanford Prison experiment. When you're a researcher, you're always objective. You're looking back at human behavior, taking notes, observing, saying maybe we should do this or this. I made the mistake of saying somebody had to be the superintendent of the prison. One of my students, David Chaffee, was the warden. My 2 graduate students were going to be the lieutenants. We each gave them a role within a prison system. And I was going to be the superintendent. That's a mistake. There should have been 2 people doing that, because if you're the authority in an institution, who do you care about? First, the institution. It has to keep going. You need to get support for your prison, for your hospital, for your clinic, for your school, and then who do you care most about? You care most about the people who are permanent, your staff, teachers, nurses, doctors, guards. You don't really care as much. You're supposed to, but you don't care as much about students, patients, or prisoners. They come and go. And so over time, I could see the prisoners suffering, but not feel it. And in fact, I prevented the guards from using physical force, but even though the guards had no psychological background, they used psychological degradation. And as I said, worse and worse each day. And so, for example, 10 o'clock at night was the last time a prisoner, any prisoners could go to a real toilet. After 10 o'clock at night, all prisoners had to urinate and defecate in buckets in their cell, which they hated because it smelled terrible. And the prisoners would hate the other prisoner made them do it. So the guards would use this 10 o'clock, we call it the toilet run, as the last time they could humiliate the prisoners. So what they did of their own device, put paper bags over their head, lined them up, put a chain from one leg to another leg, had them hold a hand on each other's shoulder, and they pushed them along down the hall into an elevator, up, down the street, around, and the whole time yelling and cursing and screaming. It was horrible. What did I see? I picked up my agenda. 8 o'clock in the morning is breakfast. 10 o'clock is visiting days. 1 o'clock is parole board hearing. Then at 6 o'clock is dinner. 10 o'clock toilet. It was only a check mark. I saw this horrific thing, and for me it was a check mark. So on Thursday night, I invited a former student of mine named Christina Maslak, who we had just started dating, and we were thinking of moving in together. And she comes, and she's a psychologist. She just got a job at Berkeley, a new professor. And she comes down. I said, "Come down. At the end of the evening, we'll go out and have dinner. I've been eating prisoner food, all this." So she comes down. I say, "Hey," I look up. It's a 10 o'clock toilet run. I say, "Hey, Chris, look at this." And she starts crying, tearing up. I said, "What's the matter with you?" She said, "I can't look at this." And she runs out, and I run after her. We have this huge argument. Now, the important thing was outside the prison setting, in front of the psychology department, which is called Jordan Hall. And I'm saying, look at this. It's the dynamics of human behavior. Nobody's ever seen this before. We've seen evolution of evil over time, day by day. We've seen the prisoners giving in, da-da-da-da. And she says, "Stop." She says, "These are not prisoners. They're not guards. They're boys. And you are responsible." And then she says, "How could you see what I see and not be upset? It's not the 10 o'clock toilet run. It's boys humiliating other boys." And I'm still yelling and screaming. And she says, "Look, how could you see what I see and not feel terrible?" And she said, "I know you." She knows me. She says, "I know you from other situations. I know you from your teaching. You love students. I love students more than anybody." And she said, "You have been changed by your situation." And she said, "If this is the real you, I don't want to have any more. I don't want to continue our relationship." And I was stunned. I just froze. And like somebody speaking to me in a foreign language. I could just remember the words are going in like, what is she saying? You've been changed. I said, "Oh my God, you're right. You're right. It's this is terrible. This is horrible. These are students. These are boys. These are like my children. And how could I allow this to happen? Yeah, it's interesting and so forth, but that's not the important thing." And I said, "Okay, I got to end the study." And she never said, "You must end it." And so I said, "Okay, let's go to dinner, and then we'll think about how I'm going to end this." Because there was a lot of logistics in terms of ending this thing. And so the next morning I went in and I said, "Okay, the experiment's over. You'll all get paid for 2 weeks." And then what we did, we spent a whole day what called psychological debriefing. We met several hours with all the prisoners, several hours with all the guards, and we brought them all together. And we said, everybody did bad things, including me, but we chose you because you're good people. And the message is that this situation corrupted all of us. So what do you learn from this? What do you take away from this situation? That you have to now understand how you're going to be in many situations in your life where you're going to be tempted to be the evil guard. You're going to be tempted to give in as a prisoner. And from this study, you have to learn that you have the ability to resist. And then we followed them all up 2 weeks later, 2 months later. So even though the experience was terrible, there was no lasting effects.
So, by this we come to the end of Word of Info, and we're having another episode with Professor Philip Zimbardo, renowned social psychologist, known for his Lucifer Effect book and known for his Stanford Prison Experiment. And we'll be seeing you next Thursday, same time.